Most sports and supercars lost between 10 and 15% during last year. But this doesn't apply to all cars. As always, they're outliers. In this video I will show you which cars continue to increase in value while the rest of the market topped and declined. If you care about values, you might want to shortlist these cars. But before we discuss the cars for which prices continue to increase, it's important to provide a little bit of context. Prices of course increased during the pandemic. I think we all know that. But as with most prices, they cannot go up forever. In the first half of 2022, price trends stopped, resulting in a new market paradigm. Depreciation made a comeback. And this means that the majority of the prices are now lower than 1 year ago. We're talking about 10 to 15%. Some lost more, others less. But there are also cars that lost nothing. In fact, they continue to appreciate. They appear to be unaffected by the market trend. We'll first have a more detailed look at those price trends, and after that investigate the price trends for the cars that made it to a similar video in 2022. Are the stars of 2022 still appreciating? Let's find out later. The first cars that made it to the list are the Ferrari F355 and 360. Price trends for those mid-engine Ferraris are strong, and this is remarkable. Prices for all other mid-engine cars that came after the F430 decreased. Over here we have the price trend for the F355 Spider. The other market segments are too small to be included. Now looking at the trend, we can see that prices increased by 11.9% or $12.4 thousand during last year. However, the confidence intervals are large, showing a high price uncertainty. It's simply the result of a small market size. Yet, we can see that the bottom value remained constant and that the top one increased. Prices didn't increase in the complete market. They mainly went up for cars with less than roughly 20,000 miles. Prices for the high mileage cars decreased slightly, so it's important to do your research if you're in the market for an F355. Moving on to the 360s, we can see that prices increased by 9.5% during last year, but this only applies to the automatic cars. Manuals aren't included here. Looking at the trend, we can see that prices followed the market during the pandemic. They surged. In 2022 the increase stopped temporarily. Yet, it wasn't a market top. Prices continued to increase after September 2022, up to a point where you had to pay $112,000 for a 360. Supply might have played an important role over here, or to be more precise, the lack of it. In September 2019, 90 cars were listed for sale, but this number decreased rapidly throughout the years. At this moment, only 20 cars are on the market. A decrease in supply by itself, though, isn't always sufficient to push prices up. Prices change as a result of a change in the scarcity level. And that's determined by the balance between supply and demand. This is of course difficult to measure, but I found that the advertised time does a decent job. The advertised time measures how long a car, on average, is listed for sale. If cars are listed longer and longer, dealers have difficulties in selling them, and prices most likely decrease. The opposite of course applies when cars are selling quicker. For example, Corvette C8s ranked with 7 days as one of the quickest selling cars in the US after their introduction. And I think we all know what happened to prices back then. They skyrocketed. If we look at the advertised time development for the 360, we can see that the cars were indeed selling quicker and quicker during the pandemic price surge, but also that the market was affected by the slowdown. Advertised times increased from 36 days in the beginning of 2022 to 103 days at the end of 2022. More recently, we can see that advertised times dropped back to 35 days. Similar values as what we saw during the pandemic price surge. And this of course explains the strong prices that we saw earlier. To be honest, the drop that you see here is extremely large, and at first I was skeptical about the magnitude. The change seems high in the context of historical changes, but then I started to look at other cars and I found similar patterns. Yet, it would be great to get some input from you as to whether or not you noticed this decrease over here. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. Data to calculate the trend for the advertised times that you just saw and the ones that you will see in the rest of the video is very kindly provided by Autotempest. Autotempest conveniently pulls listings from a bunch of different websites into one place, so that you can browse through all of them. Check out the links in the description to find the 360s for sale right now. And with that, it's time to move on to the next cars that made it to the list. Porsche lovers, pay attention. First up is the 996 market, and especially the turbo and GT3 segments. Over here we have the GT3 in blue and the turbo in orange. During last year, GT3s increased by 34% while turbos remained flat. Now looking at the GT3 market, we can see that the price trend is in some ways similar to the one in the 360 market. Prices surged during the pandemic, stabilized a bit when the market stabilized, and then continued to soar. This increase is really quite astonishing. However, GT3 owners, before you pop the champagne, it's important to be aware of certain limitations. The 996 GT3 market is extremely small, and you can see that the confidence interval is large. Therefore, there's a good possibility that the increase is lower than the 34% that you see here. That number is only based on the median prices. Prices for 997 GT3s and GT3 RSs for that matter are also strong. .2 GT3s are up by 3% and GT3 RSs by 0.5%. But supply for those cars is even smaller than for the 996 market, so we'll skip them for now. Transitioning to the turbos, we can see that the confidence intervals are more narrow. Supply is larger and the price trend more reliable. Compared to last year, the prices didn't increase, but that is still a good result. After all, prices for most sports and supercars decreased significantly. What surprised me though was the development in the advertised times. We can see again a major decrease between Q1 and Q2. We also saw this in the 360 market. And these decreases of course fit with the stable or even increasing prices. But the drop is remarkable. Just before the pandemic price surge, we also saw large drops. So it will be interesting to see if this change over here will result in further price increases. Now up until now, we covered the F355, 360, 996 GT3 and 996 Turbo. All cars of which you, reasonably speaking, could have expected that they made it to the list. Ferraris and Porsches tend to have strong price trends after all. But there's also a German brand that made it to the list this time. Over here we have the prices for the manual R8s. V10s are displayed in blue, V8s after the facelift in orange and V8s before the facelift in green. Compared to last year, V10 prices are up by 5.4%, the V8s after the facelift by 8.4% and the V8s before the facelift by 3.5%. And this is a good result, given that prices for the automatic R8s are pointing down. Naturally though, we also need to interpret these price trends with care. The confidence intervals are large following the small market sizes. They also fluctuated during last year, but the lower and upper values remained the same or increased. If we look at the advertised times, we can see that, again, the scarcity level in the market increased during Q2, and this is in line with the developments in the 360 and 996 turbo markets. Potentially, this might also lead to strong prices in the short-term future. So we saw now that price trends were strong for the Ferrari F355, 360, 996 turbo and GT3 and the manual R8s. Now if you watched my previous video about cars that were increasing in value, you'll notice that a few cars are missing in this list. Back then I listed the Ferrari F355, F430 Scuderia Coupe, 599 and 996 and 997.2 GT3. The 599 and F430 Scud are not included in this video. Why, you might ask? Prices fell, but not by much. Over here we have the two price trends. In orange you can see the Scud and in blue the 599. Scuderia prices are down by roughly 5%, following the insane price surge. 599 prices are still up by 2.7% compared to 1 year ago, but I still need to update the data for this month. After doing this, I expect that the price change arrives close to 0%. But now then, the cars that I presented to you in this video and the previous video all have some things in common. They're all at least 10 years old, have a low supply level and serve a niche market segment. And hereby the videos illustrate what is happening in the market. Prices for a lot of the newer stuff are falling as they are returning to their initial depreciation curve, while prices for the older cars are holding up quite well. Some old cars decreased a bit as a result of the market correction, but the majority also stabilized. After all, they're already bottomed out when it comes to the depreciation curve. So as of now, it seems that we are very slowly We're turning to a market dynamic that at least resembles the situation before the pandemic. The question is, of course, can you buy any of the cars that we discussed today and not lose any money on it? So far this video has been mainly descriptive. We just observed how the prices changed during last year. A discussion about future prices easily fills a complete video. So let me just say that there's a very high correlation over time when it comes to these price trends. Prices 3 months ago contain a lot of information about today's prices. Therefore, it is reasonable to assume that prices should follow the short-term trends. Again, does it mean that any of these cars are a good place for your money? I would say it depends on your risk tolerance. Much like with stock picking, it is extremely risky to buy a car and expect its value to increase while the market trend is clearly down. At the end of the day, you need to decide for yourself if you want to take the risk or not. I can only advise to buy something that you love and only look at the values after that. In the upcoming market update, we'll talk more about long-term price trends, so stay tuned for that one. And with that, we arrived at the end of this video. Now, if you enjoy this data-driven way of analyzing car markets, but would like to see an analysis for a different car, head over to my channel. Over there you'll find detailed analysis for a large variety of cars. Can't find the car you're looking for? Let me know the name of that car by commenting it down below in the comment section. Once there are enough requests for a certain car, I'll make a video about it. As always, thank you for watching and I hope to see you next week for a new video.